My infertile wife produced a child. Janelle and I couldn't get enough of each other in the beginning. We were young and insatiable, attached at the hip in every way. When I finally proposed, she responded with a tearful yes, but soon she began asking her own question, one I was less eager to answer. She'd hold me with her smooth, sweaty legs as we lay exhausted in bed. Her pounding heart would beat against mine as she lay on top of me, and she would whisper, "Can we have a child now?" I was hesitant at the start and would pick from a number of preloaded responses including, "Soon," or "Of course, just not yet." I was young and wanted to focus on my career, and the permanent jump into parenthood with no experience was a terrifying thought. Still, I loved Jan more than I'd loved anyone else. When we finally married in a small familial ceremony upstate, I began to realize I wanted to raise a child too. Though young, it was true we weren't getting any younger. One night about a month after our wedding, Janelle squeezed me with her arms and asked, "Can I have a baby?" I'll never forget the glint in her tear-filled emerald eyes as I casually replied, "Yes." They sparkled with a passion I'd never seen before, and a sudden lust consumed her. Birth control was immediately cast aside. She straddled me with an unbridled passion, and as we made love, I only then wished I'd said it sooner. Those first few weeks we spent every evening in each other's sweaty embrace, rarely bothering to get dressed until the jarring alarm woke me each morning. Janelle began the bi-weekly habit of prancing to the bathroom to pee on a plastic stick, eager to see those two lines appear, but they never did. After a month of waning enthusiasm, she began to drag her feet. I consoled her as best I could and soon suggested we see a fertility specialist. My heart teetered on a steep precipice as I gave sperm samples to my physician. I had a feeling Janelle would have kids with or without me based on how passionate she was about it. As selfish as it sounds, I exhaled with great relief when she told me the problem was within her anatomy, not mine. Janelle was infertile, an ovulation due to premature ovarian failure. She was devastated. The first few weeks I would gently try to help by suggesting alternative options, but it only seemed to exacerbate her miserable state. When I mentioned the suggestions from the fertility specialist, such as donor eggs or adopting a child, her face contorted with a hatred I'd never seen her show before. I decided to let her come to terms with her infertility on her own. I did my best to be sensitive, supportive, and caring, yet she only withdrew as the weeks stretched on into months. I felt like I was losing her, and an echo chamber of misery seemed to cast a permanent shadow inside our apartment. Then 2 months ago, Janelle had an accident. I was on my lunch break uptown when I got a call from her in the hospital she worked at. She assured me everything was all right. She'd sliced the tip of her thumb off while chopping vegetables and needed stitches. I was going to rush over, but she assured me she was fine and to wait until after work. When I picked her up from the hospital, she rushed over and squeezed me tight, crying hot, wet tears into my chest as she apologized over and over for having been so cold to me. We held each other and cried, releasing the toxic buildup that we'd held in for so long. I teased her about her puffy bandaged thumb with dad jokes about hitchhiking, and mentioned how she, with her perpetual thumbs up, appeared to be giving everything an approval of coolness. She groaned, but then truly laughed for the first time since her diagnosis. It felt like everything might actually be okay. Janelle began smiling, laughing, and truly living in the present with me once again. That sparkle that I'd missed for the past few miserable months returned to her crystal eyes. Facing our own mortality has a way of knocking other problems down to size, and Janelle seemed to follow that pattern of putting things into perspective. Despite her improvement in mood, however, she continually shied away from my physical advances. It was as if sex had no productive purpose anymore, so she'd lost interest in it altogether. "Please, not now," she'd say, or "I'm just not ready yet." I'd nod and breathe deeply before letting her know I understood. I wanted to spend my life with her. There was no rush. Then she began dressing differently. Long turtlenecks and blue jeans quickly replaced her form-fitting outfits. She would switch out into long sweatpants in the bathroom each evening, and I felt she was intentionally hiding any glimpse of her body to avoid leading me on. I began to notice the strange way her clothing hung, and I soon realized she'd been losing a dramatic amount of weight. In a matter of months, she withered away from the curvy woman I couldn't get enough of into a slim, stiff version of herself. I began to spend more time at work, focusing on getting the raise that my employer dangled before me like bait. I tagged along to the trade show in Miami one weekend, realizing part of me just wanted to get away from Jan. I kissed her goodbye that Friday morning, expecting to see her on Sunday evening, but plans changed. The second day of the trade show was canceled due to a power issue, and I took a flight back Saturday instead. I was exhausted and only looked forward to a long shower, but concern grew when Janelle didn't answer my texts I would sent from the airport. Worry became panic when I called repeatedly and got her inbox. I rushed home and unlocked the door, but sighed with relief upon entering. Jan's coat was on the chair and the shower was running. "Jan, honey, I'm back a day early. Everything okay?" I called to her, but the hiss of the shower seemed to drown out my voice. "Honey?" I called out and walked over to the door. My dress shoe slipped on the floor, and I fought to remain upright. I looked down in confusion to the spattering of red on the floor I immediately knew was blood. "Janelle!" I screamed out as dread twisted my heart in my chest. I turned the knob and flung open the door, my gaze following the blood trail to a serrated kitchen knife on the tile floor. Above it, sitting naked on the lip of the bathtub, was Janelle. I then understood why she'd stayed covered up from head to toe around me for the past few months. Large chunks of her skin and muscle were slivered away. Puffy, mottled skin encircled the sinewy craters she'd carved from her own body. In other places, large crusty scabs sat within bruised flesh, purple and infected. Deep gouges ran along her forearms and thighs, revealing scar tissue, shiny and pink where the muscle had been whittled down. Some wounds were red and fresh, streaming glistening ribbons of blood from recently flayed strips. I struggled to remain upright as the butchered body of my wife turned to me with a smile, revealing what she held in her slender, peeled arms. It was a mass of clumped meat wrapped in a stitched-together quilt of Janelle's skin. A sculpture comprised of her own carved flesh and blood, sewn into the form of a patchwork infant in varying degrees of spoil. It was a child produced from her own mutilated body, with a putrid thumb-tip nose from the accident that triggered the horrific idea. Janelle held the thing to her now breastless chest and rocked it gently back and forth in her hacked arms. "Isn't he beautiful?" she asked, looking down at the meaty collage with loving eyes wet with tears of joy. I fell backward on the blood-spattered trail on the floor, struggling to get away from the ungodly scene, but not before seeing it. Before I called the ambulance with shaky hands, before I vomited on myself, before I crawled from the bloody bathroom, before I could turn away from the horror, I saw it. I saw that nightmarish sculpture of a baby slowly turn its bloated head towards me and smile. I've been a huge fan of true, creepy podcasts for some time. You know, the ones where the podcaster does some minimal Wikipedia research on a supposedly cursed item or location. After hearing loads of lore originating in my home state of Pennsylvania, I decided to give it a try myself. I saved up for a Tascam recorder and decided I'd actually head to local places throughout PA within reasonable distance to do an on-location podcast using field recordings and my own narration while in the areas that are supposedly haunted or cursed or whatnot. I investigated an abandoned mental asylum, thinking it'd be gold, but it was just a party spot for high schoolers. There was absolutely nothing scary about it, and sure as hell no spooky voices or anything aside from crude graffiti and beer cans to explore. The second episode, I took a road trip to Hell's Hollow Wildlife Adventure Trail where you can supposedly hear moans or screams, but it was also a bust. I tried to add some eerie music, but knew faking sound effects would just be cheap and inauthentic. My effort bombed fantastically, but I decided I was going to try one more episode before giving in. I dug into the rarest and most obscure subreddits, Quora threads and message boards, in search of anything creepy within reach that hadn't been covered to death. On one such message board, I found a short thread mentioning a place in Lancaster where people seemed to dance in a trance-like state. The post mentioned seeing people dancing around a stone pillar in a way that left them deeply disturbed, yet it didn't go into much detail. I might have dismissed it as some newfangled pagans or folk dancers or even a film shoot. The thing is, the person who'd posted the inquiry about it wrote they were going to check it out next time they were in the area. I clicked their username to see an extensive post history that stopped abruptly after that post, nearly a week earlier. A little more digging and username searches led me to find people had voiced concern for the person, who seemed to have gone missing, at least from their previously ubiquitous online presence. I figured it sounded interesting enough to at least be worth the 2-hour drive out. This would be episode 3. There were few specifics in the original posting in terms of a lead to the actual location, if it did exist at all. A crooked tree in a large grain field was a marker, about 15 minutes from town. Beyond that tree, which was visible from the road, was a hill, and beyond that, a little dip of a valley where a stone pillar seemed to have emerged from the ground. Dark stone, 3 meters high, no other descriptors. I drove around for hours, and my hope waned when nothing but farmhouses, pastures, and housing developments were to be found. And I began to think it was all just some elaborate hoax or some kid messing around. But then I saw a crooked tree so out of place, I knew it had to be the one. A gnarled tangle of branches that looked so dead, I couldn't imagine it ever having been alive. I found a shoulder closest to the tree, a few hundred meters out, and exited my car. I found the tree from the posting, a telltale marker like some eldritch tangle of dead branches straight from a Tim Burton film. So funny on a peaceful spring day, a tree can look so damned evil. I always tried to embellish the creepiness of things, when in actuality it was just a dead tree. Nothing anyone hasn't seen 1,000 times. I was about to continue my silly little dictation when I heard a faint sound from somewhere off in the distance. It sounded like singing. I'll spare the hammy dictation I delivered into the recorder as I ascended the subtle grade of the hill towards the leafless tree. I huffed along, realizing how out of shape I was as I closed the distance to the tree. And that singing became more clear as well. A chorus of voices singing a simple melody that overlapped in different time signatures, like a round. It was lovely, but at the same time a bit unnerving, especially out in the middle of nowhere. When I reached the tree on the hilltop, I was then given a view of the dip in the grassy field where the singing was emanating from. A few hundred meters further, where the land dipped slightly into a valley, there was a tall black pillar of stone far darker than slate. It looked almost like powdered black glass, perhaps obsidian even. Around the rectangular tower danced around a dozen men and women, some in their late teens and some in their twilight years. The people were wearing standard clothing, jeans, dresses, sneakers, boots, no robes or religious garb of any sort. Though they all smiled and looked blissful in expression, something about the scene left me anxious beyond reason. I watched for a few minutes, dictating the scene into the recorder, praying the distant singing would pick up on the mics. "I'm going to check it out," was all I could muster into the mic when I tried to keep the dialogue going. I hadn't stuttered since going to a speech therapist in the 6th grade. Any embarrassment or regret that this episode would be a bust was wholly consumed by the overwhelming uneasiness welling up from within me. My bowels growled and my stomach squirmed. My heart pulsed heavy in my chest. I took a deep breath and began the walk towards the joyful scene on that bright April afternoon. I tread slowly across the grass, only then noticing how much more vibrant and tall it seemed to grow closer to the stone. Sure enough, there was a gradient where the perimeter was marked by dead or dying trees and yellow, dead grass on the outskirts. The center grew more and more alive. Aside from a rut beaten down by those dancers, the grass at the base of that monolith grew nearly a foot tall. I tried to dictate this. I tried to say something to the camera, but I stuttered like a broken record before shutting my mouth. I'd have to go and dub over the dialogue later, I figured. With every step towards the ring of gleeful dancers, I began to notice other details not visible from the distance. The men and women twirling around the black stone had tears running down their smiling faces. Their arms and legs seemed to bend in painful-looking angles with occasional violent spasms. I swear, I could even hear the occasional pop or crack from 100 yards out. It sounded like bone. My attention shifted when I spotted other figures walking towards the stone from other directions. There were two women not far from each other walking towards the stone from the east, and an elderly man limping towards it from the northwest. I was approaching it from the south. All I could think of at the moment was that the large stone seemed to be drawing them towards it like a magnet of sorts. When I looked back at the stone, my stomach dropped. There were only 8 people encircling the stone with their bizarre dancing. I swore there were a dozen last time I'd counted. I flinched from a loud crack that echoed through the valley. The source was a woman in what I first thought to be a long white dress, but at this distance was clearly a nightgown. Her arm was flopping around in sickening angles, cracked free at the elbow. Her lower jaw was clearly disconnected as well, and the bobbing maw of teeth flapped about as it twisted and bounced in horrendous ways. With every step towards that stone, more subtle and gruesome details became clear. Firstly, every one of the dancing people seemed to be emaciated and sunburnt. Blistered lips and red flaky cheeks shined from baking in the sun for God knows how long. Every one of them had clearly soiled themselves as well, and that song, lovely and minimal and hypnotic, wasn't being sung so much as moaned in an almost sexual manner. Another loud crunch drew my attention to an elderly man who'd fallen to the ground, leaving only 7 dancers. I nearly vomited when I realized the crunch was from his collapsing ribs. The others were dancing on top of him, on top of the fallen others. My body was racked with shivers as I was then close enough to see the flecks of burgundy and crimson speckling the legs of the dancers. Their feet were all red and wet with blood. I watched as one of the 2 women coming from the east arrived at the circle and joined in without a pause. A ghastly grin spread onto her face as she pirouetted and twirled in the mash of fallen bodies in that foul ring. She was maybe mid-30s, curly red hair that bounced in her fluid steps. She looked like she could be my aunt. A clean-cut woman ripped from her routine by the pull of whatever dark phenomenon this was. I decided then to get the hell out of there. My left foot continued on, followed by my right. I stared at the stone in horrified captivation as the revelation washed over me like ice water. My feet were carrying me forward towards that godforsaken stone. I'd lost control over my body. I tried to scream, but nothing happened. I screamed in my mind to run, but my feet trudged forth, one in front of the other. I was going to end up a paste of innards in that gory circle around the stone. It was painfully clear then. Still, I could not pull myself away. I know I would have died in that field had it not been for my alarm. I set daily reminders to keep on top of important things I keep forgetting. This was for returning books to the library before they closed, and a late fee would start racking up. So yes, my fickle concern over a late fee saved my life. Something about the annoying digital alert interrupted that disturbingly powerful trance that drew me in like a moth to flame. I was unable to stop walking, but I was able to adjust my course. There was a gravitational pull around that dancing stone. I know I barely escaped the event horizon of it all as my path bent slightly to the left. Before I was able to bend around and eventually walk back towards my car, I saw things that will stay with me forever. I saw the amalgamation of twisted, broken limbs being stamped into the ground. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of completely pulverized dead. The smell of coppery blood and putrefaction and rot were beyond description, but it pervaded my nostrils, and I don't think it will ever fully leave. I saw small digits in the mess of gore mashed into the earth, remnants of children's hands and skulls of babies, teeth and hair and organs drenching deep into the ground. I've never been as relieved in my life as when it was finally out of my peripheral vision. I wasn't able to control my feet until I was nearly back to my vehicle. With shaking hands, I unlocked the door and got in. I locked my gaze on the road ahead and started the ignition. Cramps stabbed my thigh muscles from whatever Herculean efforts they'd applied to divert their final destination. I sped off like a bat out of hell, and I blasted whatever the radio could give me to get that earworm of hypnotic, droning singing out of my head. My stutter hasn't gotten better. I can barely speak at all. The podcast dream's shattered. I've not been able to stop shaking since that day. Every night I stay awake as terror swirls in my mind, knowing very well what I'll see when exhaustion finally sucks me into a deep, dark sleep. I'll see the wide grins and flailing broken limbs of those people. The collapsed faces under dancing heels stained red with blood, and that black plaque of death planted in that otherwise calm valley. I'll see the dancing stone, and all I can think of is how so desperately I want to go back. My girlfriend moved out 3 weeks ago. My cat, Rook, was really close to her, and now that she's gone, I can tell he's a bit lonely, especially when I'm at work. I came home a few times to my curtains ripped up, or all the toilet paper in shreds. The last straw was when I came home after working late to find he had clawed a hole the size of a dinner plate into the side of the sofa. I decided I had to do something. I tried different toys, even catnip, but nothing worked. One night while browsing Amazon, I saw a pet camera. It's a tiny camera that records your pet on a live feed so you can monitor their behavior while you're away. It even has an audio function so you can talk to them. Sounded silly, but hey, I love my furry dude, so I bought it. I got overnight shipping and installed it immediately. I decided to set it up in my bedroom, as that was where Ruck dwelled most. My first day at work, I think I checked that camera 30 times. When I spoke into the microphone, Ruck seemed to be happier, and I noticed there was no destruction around the house either. By day 4, I figured I'd solved the problem with Ruck. That leads me to right now. About 30 minutes ago, I climbed in bed with Ruck, ready to close my eyes, when my phone buzzed. A notification from the pet cam. I almost ignored it, sure I'd just triggered the thing. But I opened it anyway. What I saw made my grip tighten on the phone. Instead of a video of myself in bed, I saw a man, tall, gangly, with pale skin and large eyes. He was moving into my room with exaggerated steps like a sneaking cartoon character. He got right up to the lens, so close I could almost smell his rotten breath, and he smiled. I immediately paused the video, terrified. I looked at the spot where the man should have been standing, but there was no one there. I went onto Amazon and found the pet cam and read the reviews, hoping for some weird glitch. It had to be a joke, right? The first dozen reviews were pretty standard, but it was the last that caused me to bolt upright. The customer complained that the camera was on a time delay, sometimes as much as 15 minutes. I went back to the video and pressed play with shaky fingers. I watched in horror as the man slithered under my bed, giving the camera a wink before disappearing in the darkness. Then I saw myself enter the room and climb in bed before the video ended. Now I'm sitting in my bed, knowing he's under it. I could call the police, but I doubt I'd have time. So please do yourselves a favor and read the reviews. I tried the strange face in the mirror illusion, but I think I did something wrong. It was just one of those stupid internet things, like an urban legend or creepypasta ritual or something. Except this one had some merit to it. There was an actual study, a scientific explanation, some genuine evidence behind it. It wasn't some supernatural phenomena. It was your brain, your very own wonderful mind, just fucking with you. I think that's the part that intrigued me the most. The chance to experience something truly disturbing, all the while knowing that it was merely a visual illusion. For those of you who have never heard of the illusion, it's pretty simple. All you need is a dimly lit room, a chair, and a mirror. The chair should be placed approximately 15 inches from the mirror, and the light, preferably a dim lamp with a bulb no stronger than 25 watt, should be behind the chair. All you have to do is sit down, stare at your own reflected face, and within a minute or so, you should start noticing the bizarre face illusion. According to the study, there's a whole mixed bag of freaky shit you can expect to see. Deformations in your own face, your parents' faces with changed traits, an unknown person's face, animal faces, even monstrous demonic things. At the time, I wasn't sure what I saw, but it fucked me up good. It took a while before I realized anything had happened at all. I guess maybe the changes were so gradual, so vague, that my eyes couldn't quite catch what was going on. But when I did notice, in that indescribable moment of horror, I instinctively kicked the mirror, fell back in my chair, and knocked over the lamp. The mirror fell on top of me, the lamp broke, and I was flailing on the floor, screaming hysterically. It took me hours to calm down, but I couldn't fathom why. I didn't even remember what I saw. My reflected face had been all shadowy and blurry, only vaguely familiar, kind of like a fuzzy memory. Then all of a sudden I must have seen something. Something bad. Something so shocking that my fight or flight instinct kicked in. So horrible that my mind locked the memory of it away. Whatever it was, I swore I'd never do it again. I'd tried it, it fucked me up, and I was ready to just move on from there. Find something else. Something safer. Maybe spend a night in a haunted house or something. Get my adrenaline rush from somewhere else than the depths of my own twisted subconscious. I went to work the next day feeling like shit. I guess we all feel that way about our jobs to some extent. But this was something else. Some deep, hidden anxiety. A veiled sensation of dread or something. But after a couple of calls from some really obnoxious clients, it all sort of faded away, replaced instead by a sweet and familiar discontempt for humankind as a whole. At lunch, I sat down with Brandon and Joy, the office couple. They were decent people, I guess, a bit too cheery for my taste, but I didn't really mind. After a dozen or so less than satisfying conversations with unbelievably toxic clients, I could even use some cheery. "You okay, Ken?" Joy asked cheerily. "You look a little worse for the wear." "He does, doesn't he?" Brandon chimed in. "Rough night, buddy." I feigned a smile and nodded. "Yeah, I'm good," I lied. "Just, Mondays." I don't exactly know what happened next. I vaguely remember Brandon and Joy talking about curtains, shoes, shelves, something boring. I guess must have zoned out at some point, because the next thing I remember is my half-full glass of milk shattering on the floor. I instantly snapped out of my trance and started apologizing profusely, awkwardly bending down to collect the shards. "I'm sorry, I can be so clumsy," I think I muttered as I sat back up, placing the remnants of the broken glass on my empty plate. Brandon and Joy didn't say anything. They were sitting perfectly still, eerily still staring at me in wide-eyed shock, or fear, or both. "Jesus Christ, Ken," Joy stammered incoherently. "Don't move! Brandon! We need to get you to the hospital," Brandon yelled. "Right now!" I was confused, my gaze darting back and forth between the two of them. They looked genuinely upset, scared even, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why. "What's wrong?" I asked, blood now pouring out of my mouth. I can't say how I didn't notice before, but at that moment I became painfully aware. I could feel the razor-sharp shard with the tip of my tongue, a long, thin piece of glass sticking through my right cheek. I gently pulled at it, resulting in the jagged edges slowly cutting through even more of my flesh. "It's not so bad," I mumbled. "Just a flesh wound." Brandon and Joy freaked out, throwing chairs aside and yelling hysterically at each other. Brandon ran back and forth like he didn't quite know what he was doing. "Get the car!" Joy just kept shouting at him. She was awkwardly trying to lift me up, tugging violently at my shirt. It was white when I sat down, I remember thinking. Now it was a deep shade of red. At some point, I just stood up and started walking, a frantic Joy at my side, trying her very best to steer me in the direction of the car. I tried to calm her down, smiling reassuringly when she asked me if I was okay, but it didn't really seem to help. The drive to the hospital was quiet and peaceful. Brandon and Joy were probably scared senseless, and I just found myself thinking about what had happened. There was no way it was an accident. Like, how? Did I bend down and scrape my face against the floor? No, there was only one explanation that made any sense. I must have stabbed myself, but I couldn't remember doing it. Couldn't remember anything. Whatever really happened, Brandon, Joy, and the doctors treated it like it was some freak accident. They didn't ask any questions, just did their best to comfort me and patch me up. There were a lot of stitches. Can't remember how many. There'd be a scar, though, they told me. Couldn't be helped, apparently. They kept me in the hospital overnight. I guess they wanted to keep an eye on me or something. Brandon and Joy assured me they'd pick me up first thing in the morning. I'd be fine, they said. I just shrugged and smiled. I would have thanked them, but I had a hard time moving my mouth. I slept fairly undisturbed. There were some weird dreams, but nothing too extreme, and I woke up in a rather dazed state, staring at a bowl of cereal neatly placed on a tray next to my bed. I was quite famished, so I immediately emptied it, munching happily on the squishy contents of it. Squishy. Sure, in retrospect, it doesn't sound right at all. It didn't taste right either. That's the weirdest part, I think. I mean, I was munching away happily, all the while thinking this shit tastes horrible. And the texture of it, I don't know, it was like chewing on a leathery egg filled with vile, rotten liquid. But I didn't stop. Not until the nurse came in, dropped her tray, and started screaming bloody murder. I instinctively spat it out. It sort of rolled unsteadily on the floor for a while, before settling rather poignantly by the feet of the hysterical nurse. A half-chewed human eyeball. My half-chewed eyeball. I don't know if I recognized it, or if it was the pain, or the fact that I was half-blind that tipped me off. But as soon as the realization hit me, I completely lost it, and all these strange, erratic thoughts started going through my head. How did it happen? Why did I eat my own eyeball? What did it taste like? Was it as bad as pineapple on pizza? Would I eat it again given the opportunity? The nurse wouldn't stop screaming. I couldn't stop screaming. I stumbled down from my bed, backing away from the nurse and the eyeball rapidly. It was staring right at me, judging me, loathing me, hating me. It was the last thing I saw before I lost balance and tumbled clumsily out of the open window. My memory is a bit hazy, I'll admit, but I remember the ground coming closer and closer, and the all-consuming feeling of this is it. This is where I die. This is how I die. Half naked in the hospital parking lot, missing my right eyeball. What would my epitaph say? He seemed perfectly normal until he dug out his eyeball and ate it. I lost consciousness when my head struck a fence about halfway down. That's what saved me, apparently. Broke the fall. Only messed me up, didn't kill me. I suppose I should be thankful. All in all, I was lucky. Just a dislocated jaw, a broken arm, a light concussion, and some missing teeth. 16 missing teeth. All on the right side. I was a mess, a fucking monster. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror. Couldn't stand the thought of it. I could see it in their eyes. The loathing, the disgust, the repulsion. But I knew I had to do it eventually. So I did. All you need is a mirror, a chair, and a dim lamp. Just sit down and stare at your reflected face. After a minute or so, you'll start seeing it. See the illusion. Unless it isn't an illusion, then you'll just see the truth. I erupted in what I can only describe as a maniacal laughter, my disfigured, monstrous visage twisting horribly in masochistic insanity as the reflection slowly started changing. I kept laughing, couldn't stop laughing. The pain was unbearable. My stitches tore, blood pouring into my horribly damaged mouth. Long after my reflection changed to a terrified, wide-eyed, shocked version of my once handsome self, I kept laughing. Only after he disappeared, taking the mirror with him, could I finally stop.